There were two different styles, and both very successful. Dottie's style was one of, she would be in your face, she would really be demanding, she didn't suffer fools gladly. She really would, and then she would and not be afraid in a meeting to say, well, I don't agree with that, I think we're on the wrong track, and we need to, and you're welcome to argue with me on that and debate that issue, but we need to debate that right here if we're going to go any further. And you never left a meeting at all wondering what did she mean. I mean, she was very direct in that way. She could do it in a way that didn't upset, particularly people who weren't afraid to be challenged. It just didn't upset them. People who were secure in their leadership and so on. She would make you think, but it would be right on. Russ could do it in just a couple words, and he would not come in. You'd hardly hear him during a meeting, and then he would, in 2 or 3 quiet words, change the whole direction of a meeting. I've seen him do it time after time after time. And what was interesting to me is the direction in which he encouraged people to go by those few words was always, and you don't say always often, always the right direction. He had an uncanny ability to do that. He really was, I think, for several reasons. I think his sheer intellect, number one, and number two, his incredible security. He was a very secure person. And maybe there was a third, and that is that his touch with nature. I mean, he truly was, in his mind, a farmer, a rancher, an apple orchard, an orchard leader, and I mean, he really was. And that, I think, gave him a touch to reality and to humanness that very few people had. If I may, I'm just going to give a story, and it's just typical of the way he handles himself. When I was doing my oral defense of the dissertation, it was a very esoteric dissertation. First of all, it was in tax, and secondly, it was on a very rare tax reform act that impacted private foundations in a very different way than had ever happened before. So you could invite outsiders to come to your dissertation defense. And I invited Russ. Now, first of all, for him to even take the time to come over to sit in this room for a defense of a dissertation was the most unusual thing in the world, because his schedule was international. It wasn't national. He could be anywhere. He could be in Europe, Switzerland, Asia, South America, and so on. So for him to do that, number one. But you always have a professor who wants to, in a sense, make a point, but not at, helping to clarify the methodology and so on, more to show what they know. And there was one that just didn't get out much, and he was kind of local in his perspective and so on. And he started challenging, well, that's not the way foundations do it, that's not the way. Well, the other people in the room, knowing he was going to be there, were there, the leaders of the university, were squirming and uncomfortable, and you could see, and they thought, what is going to happen here? And Russ waited until he got finished. He said, well, you know, I've been involved with foundations a little bit, he said, and actually the way Dr. Lohr, which of course he hadn't had the doctorate yet, but it was very subtle on his part, explained that is really the way it is in the foundation world. That's all he said. And so right away, the chair of who was the head of the business school was very smart, and right away he thought, I've got to help this poor guy out. And he said, he said, well, you know, Dr. Mawby, being the chairman of the world's largest foundation, that we appreciate hearing that from your perspective. This professor, of course, just backed right off and didn't. That was the way Russ was. Another person might have come right at him and said, you know what you're talking about, you shouldn't be saying those kind of things and so on. Not Russ. Russ handled it in a way that made his point, didn't embarrass the person, and that's the kind of person he is, and it's a typical Russ Mawby story. I've seen him do it often because I was close to him. When I did my internship in 1974, I was his intern. My office was right outside his office, so I went everywhere he went. If he went to Wisconsin, to Wingspread, I went with him and so on. So we had many, many quiet hours together, and I'd seen him do it when he'd walk into a room and he looked least important of anybody in there, and yet he was by far the leader without question.